Hey, what's up guys? Darkspars here, bringing you some Darktide. So, Darktide just recently had another big update. The first one since the Arbitration DLC actually. Once again, reworking the talent trees, meaning our builds were once again reset. The classes that had their talent trees reset were the Arbitration, Psyker, and Zealot. Ogryn and the Veteran also saw changes to their talents, but their talent trees weren't reset. Ogryn only had its talents adjusted, a couple of different percentages here and there, so just a couple of buffs and nerfs. No changes or new talents were added though. But the Veteran only had 2 new talents added, so I don't know why the reset didn't happen, but it's a good idea to just make that reset anyway and just kind of rebuild and see if you find something new for your guys' builds. The other part of this update added a new event, a new enemy type, and 2 new bolt weapon patterns, one for the bolt rifle and the other for the bolt pistol. Gonna jump right into it, starting with the Zealot, which has always been my primary class since I started playing Darktide back in the day. So the Zealot had sort of a fallen off as the go-to class for anything and everything melee shortly after Arbitration began a couple months back. The changes to the Zealot's talent tree has made it more forgiving and allowing you to build an even more pure form of melee combat. Many of the nodes are focused more on melee stats, with a few routes you can take to Martyrdom, arguably the Zealot's best build. However, you still have routes to build between ranged and melee or lean a little more towards one or the other. Zealot is known for its strong melee, but Darktide doesn't force you to build Zealot that way, which is something to appreciate, as many games that are class locked also force you to play that class's particular playstyle in which you may or may not like. So it's something to appreciate when it comes to Darktide. They still give you the choice to play your favorite class, but also kind of pick and choose how you want to play it. Zealot's talents have essentially been consolidated and condensed, while also making up for it by increasing the values of each talent. For example, my preferred keystone is Martyrdom. Essentially, Martyrdom is Zealot in my opinion. They lowered the max stacks from 7 to 5, but they increased the melee damage of each stack from 8% to 10%. For each missing wound you have, which is your health segments, the more health segments you have, obviously the more melee damage you can get. I am not sure if decreasing the amount of wounds you have, say to like 3 or 4, I don't know if that essentially increases the amount of melee damage you have by just having more condensed health. I am not too sure on that. I'd have to do a lot of testing on that portion. I've always gone for the max amount of wounds possible, just because I can always easily tell the difference between my melee damage from having full health to having no health. So they also removed old talents and replacing them with new ones, which offers more variety in melee damage, attack speed, toughness regen, and damage reduction. All in all, you have just that many more choices to choose from that make more sense for the Zealot. This will make your build a little more unique without having to worry about opting out for the meta build. These changes will make an even okay or decent Zealot into a first class Zealot. Now, to be quite honest, I have been playing a lot of the Arbiter. Basically, I've only been playing Arbiter since the Arbitration DLC dropped. So I've been kind of ignoring all my other classes, but after going back to my Zealot, who's always been my main class, I suddenly felt like rebuilding the Martyrdom felt much easier, as I didn't have to go off the route too often to get certain nodes that offer melee stats in an effort to keep my pure melee build, while I still had enough points to spec into all of the Martyrdom specific traits, at least the ones that I use. From there, I went into my first game with the new build, and I was still able to see a difference in my melee combat, always playing on Ulrich difficulty, and I had no trouble going through massive hordes, both specialist and standard Minotaur's hordes. I'll have to revisit the hammer in particular, which has always been one of my least favorite melee weapons for the Zealot due to its low cleave potential. I've always been struggling with using the hammer against hordes, though its trade-off has been it's one of the best weapons to use against armored enemies and bosses. The new changes, I feel, makes the Zealot not only the top melee combat in the game once again, but also retains some of the tankiness, though that does depend on how the Zealot is built. The Arbitries and Ogryns get access to shields. That obviously makes them easier to properly tank everything so long as they have the stamina for it. But the Zealot allows you the opportunity to turn that defense into a very strong, if not overpowered offense. You can clear horde after horde after horde and never lose fortitude, much less a bit of health, though why would you not want to lose health when using Martyrdom? Zealot is for players who love being a masochist and being able to go ham without worrying about how you make it to the other side so long as you've made it. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Martyrdom, you're far more efficient as a Martyrdom Zealot if you have no health. The less health you have, the more damage you do. Always remember that when you're building a Zealot, particularly when you're wanting to build Martyrdom. It's a very fun class to use, but it's also a very hard class to use if you don't build it properly, especially when maintaining your fortitude, as well as staying in squad coherency. That squad coherency, there are talents within the Zealot that make you a little bit more tankier when you have no health left. So always keep that in mind. The less health you have, the better, which is kind of strange to say. Now, as for the Psyker, I am not well versed in the Psyker. According to the update, they made some adjustments to the Psyker's survivability, but since I don't play it often, I literally cannot tell the difference, or I most likely didn't rebuild her properly. I feel as if rebuilding a Psyker is much more tricky than building a Zealot due to the vastly different playstyles. I often forget I can't play my Psyker the same way I can play my Zealot because of that survivability aspect of the Psyker. It's just non-existent. I believe if I chose Psyker as my primary class, I would be way better at it, as it's obviously the hardest class for me to play. I ended up having to lower the difficulty for my Psyker from Auric level down to Malice, and Malice is, I feel like, comfortable for me to play Psyker without having too many troubles, but I'm still having some issues with Psyker, and I don't know why. I think the main issue is I still keep trying to play my Psyker as if I'm playing my Arbiter or my Ogryn or my Veteran or my Zealot, just literally any other class who I can play much more aggressive and is actually a little bit more rewarding to play aggressively. Can't really play aggressively and get rewarded for it as a Psyker. And the strangest part is I used to play mages a ton. Any game that involves mages, especially Smite, and I know that Smite is definitely not the same genre as a horde shooter like Darktide, but the fact that the Psyker basically is the mage of Darktide, you would think I would have an easy pickup on the Psyker class, but no, it feels like it's a whole new class for me to play. So I'm gonna have to go back to the drawing board for a while. So the new pattern of bolt gun as well as the bolt pistol, they basically both act the same way. Kind of just depends on which one you want to take with you into a game. They're essentially grenade launchers, so the rounds explode on impact, a small little AoE damage, but they also still have a good amount of knockback. Very good at horde clearing, especially if you're in a tight spot. Just pull that out if you're using it, and it's gonna make your life a lot easier. It does have a much slower, and I mean a much slower rate of fire, but that's also a good thing. It's very controllable opposed to the default Mark spear gun. The other thing too is they also kind of toned down the default spear gun. A lot of people are using it, and for good reason. It is a very overpowered weapon. So they are reducing the amount of reserve ammo you can carry, but the ammo capacity is going to stay the same. So just keep that in mind when using the default marks. They did not mention anything, or at least I can't see anything in the patch notes about any changes to the default pattern bolt pistol. But regardless of the small nerf to the ammo count or the ammo reserve for the default spear gun, it actually is the new pattern is pretty fun to use. Perfect for horde clearing, so just definitely start taking advantage of that and picking up whenever you can. I know that a lot of people don't really like the bolt weapons. There is a good choice of range weapons to choose from. I know a lot of people think that the bolt guns are kind of boring, but the new pattern actually is kind of fun. It's, you know, it's a grenade launcher basically. So it is nice that we got 2 new patterns for the bolt weapons. I don't think we should expect to see any more patterns in the near future, or at least for any class besides the Ogryn. If they were to release another bolt gun, possibly a 30 rounder, which is actually used by Space Marines and the Sisters of Battle, only the Ogryn would be able to wield that. Right now, the only reason why these bolters in Darktide have 15 rounds instead of 30 rounds is because the 15 round lock pattern bolters are actually used specifically for the humans, because a human won't be able to wield a 30 round bolter. That's way too heavy for them. Obviously the recoil would break their arms and such, so for them to release a 30 round bolter, like a full on Adeptus Astartes Sisters of Battle bolter, it would have to be for the Ogryn. And frankly, the Ogryn could use some more weapons. It's nice that we got some more weapons for the Veteran, which is just the Power Falchion, and obviously the patterns for the bolt weapons. But I think for the next release or the next round of weapons, definitely let's give the Ogryn some love. And then for the event itself, it's just the same event as it was during Mortis Trials and Mortis Trials first drop. It's just a series of objectives that you got to complete. You'll get orbital dockets out of them, and then when you complete every single one, you'll get a bonus. That's just all the event is, and I think it's just to kind of celebrate the release of the new enemy type, which is the Scab Plasma Gunner. I have not encountered the Scab Plasma Gunner too often. The one time I did encounter him, the one way to figure out when he's about to fire at you is you'll hear a very low hum, kind of like an unsettling hum type of thing, but it's very quick, just like a second or two of a hum. That's your cue to dodge. If you don't get hit by it, it hits a lot harder than the Scab Shotgunner does, so just keep an eye out for him. It's cool that we got another enemy archetype, but he is a ranged enemy archetype. I would like to see some more Nurgle based enemies rather than infested enemies like the Scab enemy types and whatnot. I mean, really, the one thing I would love to see, because we're fighting Nurgle, you can't fight forces of Nurgle in Warhammer 40k without fighting the Death Guard, the Plague Marines. You know, I would love to fight the Plague Marine, but canonically, it would be virtually impossible for normal humans, especially for some rejects, or maybe the Arbites might have a chance, but who knows? It's kind of impossible to fight a Plague Marine without a loyalist Space Marine to fighting by your side, but who knows? June 23rd was the release of the Arbites DLC, so 3 months ago, Arbitration began in Darktide, and I believe 3 months is a good amount of time to sit between major updates, because this one not just adding 3 new weapons, a new mission, and a new enemy, but it also tons of bug fixes as well as glitches and whatnot. A lot of that's been fixed. Obviously, there's more that needs to be done, and of course, the reworks to the talent trees for every single class, except for Ogrins. I mean, Ogrins just had a couple of adjustments made to their talents, but no new talents were added. So it's a good update overall. Are we going to be waiting another 3 months for the next major update? Probably so. The one thing I don't want to be waiting another 3 years for is another class. If things are moving a little bit easier over at Fat Shark, the developers who made this game, hopefully we can see a new class here much sooner rather than later. I can only assume that they are still also working here and there on Vermintide 2 as well. Vermintide 2 does still see some updates from time to time, as well as some events, although I don't play Vermintide 2 as often just because I'm not too much of a fan of the Age of Sigmar universe, which is just a fantastical version of Warhammer. Age of Sigmar has never been as popular as 40k is. That, or people just don't really know too much about Age of Sigmar. Age of Sigmar just isn't as saturated in media as the 40k universe is, and you know, it's kind of to be expected. 40k is it's grimdark. Age of Sigmar doesn't really have that grimdark feel to it. It's just more dark fantasy, and it's just not my cup of tea. Plus, I don't know anything much about the lore, even though there's tons of lore. I think there's just as much lore in Age of Sigmar as there is with 40k. Granted, I think 40k just has a lot more depth to its lore than Age of Sigmar does. Age of Sigmar, I think everything takes place in one condensed world rather than 40k, which is more of a galaxy-wide type of conflict. Anyway, getting sidetracked. Overall, this is a solid update. To summarize this update, it's 3 new weapons, talent reworks, and adjustments across the board for every class except the Ogrint, who just had adjustments to some of his talents. A new enemy type, new event, and tons of tweaks and bug fixes. In my opinion, better to work on this stuff now before releasing something major like a new class, and not release something major before making the necessary adjustments, because then that could just cause more headache. That way, in the long run, when other updates come along, they won't be as big because they won't include as many bug fixes and tweaks, because that's all been patched beforehand. I'm pretty sure that's how Fat Shark is trying to do these updates. I think it's better to have one major update that fixes a lot of issues that are being addressed, rather than releasing a patch or a small fix or a hot fix every other day like Call of Duty or Warframe or whatever, however they do it. I think Fat Shark is doing it way better. It's a much better formula for them. All right, that about does it for this video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys on the next video. This is Darksparse signing off.